It looks like the two fake Department of Homeland Security agents are going home. A federal judge just ruled today that the government prosecutors didn't meet their burden. Of course, we're talking about these two gentlemen. We've talked a lot about them. Haider Ali and Arian Taherzadeh, Tazzy as we've been calling him. We've got a minute entry update from the court. You can see we had two separate hearings that took place today. One in the morning, one in the afternoon. We saw earlier this morning that the hearing started, it was held, but it did not conclude. And so they came back at 4 p.m. And the prosecutors showed up and they gave the judge some more information. The judge had some additional questions. And remember, we're on day 3 of this thing. Okay, normally these things are 30 minutes, sort of at the beginning of the case. It's not a big complex thing, but this has turned into a big deal. And as we're going to see, it seems like the government prosecutors may have filed charges too soon. And they were really kind of stuck because they had no choice. The Secret Service, we're going to find out, might have tipped off these two defendants, which is what caused the prosecutors to have to rush this whole thing through, which means that they went forward without all of the evidence they needed. And the judge kind of had no choice but to let them go. And so, as I've been saying, the judge was sort of giving the government a little bit more time, a little bit more time, a little bit more time. Do you have anything else? Because you're saying all of these things, but you haven't charged these two people with the stuff that you're saying is problematic. In other words, we were hearing all about these gun crimes and guns this and guns this, but they weren't charged with any gun crimes, and they weren't really sort of using the guns in their impersonation under the indictment. So sort of the facts that the government was saying that we can prove were kind of not that consequential. The judge was saying, well, I need more. And so as we can see, the judge gave them another opportunity this morning to do that. We had the defense attorneys from the public defender's office, Michelle Peterson. We've got the CGA appointed attorney, Greg Smith, prosecutor Joshua Rothstein were all there. Then they came back this afternoon and the judge basically said, all right, sorry, prosecutors, you guys blew it. You kind of, came forward with this thing too soon. You're stuck with this. The Secret Service might have done it, as we're going to find out. But here, the judge said, look, on the oral motion by the government to commit the defendant and to retain these two people, heard and denied. The judge says, nope, sorry, denied. So we're moving forward with this. We're going to stay the release of the defendants, though, until tomorrow morning at 9 a.m. So at the last minute, the prosecutor sort of, Judge, can you just, I know you issued that order. Can we just stay this thing pending an appeal? We might appeal this ruling because we want to see if there's anything we can do to, kind of fix this problem. And the judge said, all right, look, I'll give you till the morning to file an appeal. If you appeal it, I'm going to stay the order pending the outcome of the appeal. But remember, they don't get to sort of introduce a bunch of new stuff on this appeal. They're appealing what was discussed on this lower level detention hearing. So they didn't get to come out there and now at the appeal, bring in all this new evidence. It's like, no, did the judge issue the right ruling on the evidence that was heard before him at this original detention hearing? So they can't just, appeal because they don't like the decision. They've got to find something that the judge screwed up here, or some authority that justifies an appeal. And so they're going to be up all night, scrambling through the court, a precedent on Westlaw and LexisNexis and all over there. Good luck, everybody. And they're just going to be going wild trying to figure out if there's anything they can do to keep these guys in custody. So they'll be back tomorrow. The judge, and remember, this doesn't mean the case is dismissed. It just means these two guys are going home. The judge, as we're going to see, imposing all sorts of additional release conditions that we'll see. And then they set the preliminary hearing back on April 27th, which is just like it sounds. It's a preliminary hearing, and we'll get into that as this case matures a bit. But here you can see defendants remain committed until tomorrow morning. Otherwise, they're free to go. And the judge is saying you've got just a short couple hours to come up with something. And we'll see, of course, how the actual hearings went from our friend over from Reuters, Sarah N. Lynch, doing an outstanding job live tweeting these proceedings as they are happening in real time. And so I was sort of glued to the screen on her Twitter feed, refresh, F5, 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 F5 this afternoon to see what was happening with this. And so thank you to Sarah Lynch. Please go follow her at Sarah N. Lynch on Twitter. She says, good morning. We're on day 3, third in capitals. Like I agree. This is crazy. For these two people who are accused of impersonating the feds. She's over covering Reuters in DC. As I said, please go follow her. She is reporting. She says the judge comes out. Good morning, everybody. We're here for the third day prosecutors, hopefully you've got something better than you had the last 2 days, because I don't want to let these guys go, but you got to give me something here. So he says, I got a few additional questions for you, Mr. Prosecutor. Harvey, the judge, asks about the 2 handguns at issue, right? We're talking about the SIG and the Glock 19, which came up repeatedly. He wants to know the circumstances now about Ali's arrest. And this is a very important concept because, or issue that has come up, because they're talking about these 2 guys being a flight risk. And one of the things that the defense has said repeatedly is that they kind of weren't a flight risk. You know, they said that Ali in particular was sort of communicating with that Postal Service inspector. I'm sorry, I'll turn myself in. You know, what do you need from me? And so this has become something that they have been fighting over from both sides. Sarah Lynch says the 2 men were both arrested while they're meeting with an attorney. Very sacred relationship there. Who knows why? They were located at a restaurant. Unclear, she says, as to why they were meeting with a lawyer. Were they friends, or were they trying to potentially engage in representation? We don't know. Rothstein, the government prosecutor, says the defendant, Ali, was at some point sharing his location with other federal agents he had befriended. And so what does that mean? We're not real sure. You know, sometimes you have those like group apps and you can see where everybody is. You know, I don't know what it would be for the feds, like why they would be wanting to know where each other is, or I don't know, but he was sharing it with them. The FBI was using it to track him. And at some point he turned it off. And so you might say that's pretty suspicious. The prosecutors, of course, will. This goes on. And she says, the judge wants to know, why would that be evidence of obstruction? Why would him turning his phone off so that they don't know his location? Why would that be obstruction? Why can't we just say that's circumstantial evidence? That's just something that he does. You know, he turned his phone off. People do that. People don't want to be followed sometimes. You go into incognito mode whenever you got to do incognito things. You see here, he may have been doing that. Is that unreasonable? Prosecutor says, yeah, I mean, I understand your point, Judge, but the timing was suspect because he was also meeting with lawyers and he was also sort of, texting with the postal inspector, and he knew that the walls were crashing in upon him. He was now getting suspicious. Government prosecutor also says the government is not alleging that they actually attempted to flee. Right? We're talking about impersonation is the only thing that we saw in the criminal complaint. Prosecutor also says the government doesn't think that 0 to 6 month guideline range is appropriate in this case. And he says that shouldn't really factor into the equation here. This is talking about the defense making the argument multiple times that, Judge, look, let's say, for example, that we just went in and pled guilty, like to all of the charges. We said everything the government says here is true. As we're charged in the criminal complaint, we go in and we don't even fight it. We say, yeah, sentence me. The judge, under the sentencing guidelines, because the prosecutors have largely undercharged this, presumably, is that they can only get 0 to 6 months. And so the defense is saying they're not going to freak out or flee the country or become a flight risk over 0 to 6 months. What are you, nuts? They'll just go in there and, get a vacation, have a nice sabbatical, and then they'll come back out. He'll go back to his wife and 4 kids, and he'll, go to a separate prison. That's the point. They're trying to minimize this versus the prosecution saying this guy's a flight risk. He's a national security incident. If he is released, he's going to flee the country because he's got all of these, potential ramifications, very severe consequences. Not really. 0 to 6 months. Prosecutor says, well, that shouldn't factor into this equation. Judge says, in cases where the guideline range is high, he says, I've considered it. So when it's low, why wouldn't I consider it? Right. In other words, if somebody was going to be getting life in prison, I say, yeah, that's a pretty good reason. Now they might flee. So if there is somebody who's not getting life in prison, why wouldn't I consider that? Prosecutors have offered it part of the analysis. Why wouldn't I do it here? The judge says. And prosecutor says, well, good question, Judge. Judge moves on. Says, those agents, prosecutor tells the judge, those agents here that we're talking about, let them into their circle of trust, talking about Haider and Ali, Haider and Tazi. And they may have said things that they would not ordinarily tell people. Prosecutor says, Judge, these individuals were giving gifts to people. We were investigating whether or not any bribery occurred. And you see this here, they're investigating it. Well, they haven't charged them with it yet. And it sounds like, as we're going to see, it's because they got tipped off. We've covered that previously. Prosecutor says these agents protected, listen to this, Jill Biden, which we knew, the White House, which we also knew, but not this one, Kamala Harris's residence. Didn't see that one before. Now, we knew that they were sort of protective detail for the First Lady. We knew that several of them apparently were over at the White House, but not Kamala Harris's residence. So it's the whole executive branch, basically. Sarah says the prosecutor was saying that he had not intended to move so quickly on the case, but due to a tip-off, they were forced to act. And we've talked about this previously in a prior video, this tip-off argument. And the more I'm learning about this, the less I think it was an actual tip-off. Sounds like kind of a blunder, like a screw-up that came from the Secret Service. Judge says, well, look, you haven't proffered any evidence. You haven't brought forward anything that these gentlemen bribed anyone. And the government says, yeah, well, I know it's still under investigation. Just like we saw previously. We didn't want to go so quickly. We're investigating it. We're investigating the bribery. We're investigating that part. Prosecutor says Tazzy also represented himself as an agent to a naval officer. We talked about that. The officer was so concerned that he reported it to NCIS for review, and now that is under investigation. So that's being worked up. Bribery is being worked up. Judge says, all right, well, do you have any evidence that they, quote, intended for their gifts to be to compromise the agents, as opposed to, just ingratiate themselves and befriend them? Maybe these guys, the judge is thinking, they want to be like these special police officers. They're really excited about it. They've applied multiple times. They keep failing. They created this little LLC. It's like, hey, they want to like hang out with you guys. They want to just go party around with you. And maybe they were sending you cigars because maybe they'd say, you have a job at the Secret Service. Can I go, mop floors for a while before I get a job? Can you get me an in somewhere? Maybe that's what this is all about, as opposed to sort of compromise them and secrete evidence, as the prosecution is implying. And the prosecutor goes, Judge, I'm sorry about this. Again, we're still investigating that. We don't have any more on that. I know, I'm embarrassed too. Prosecutor says, but I am worried, regardless, Judge, of where we're at, about whether Ali is a flight risk, given his travel history to the Middle East. He has a passport. He's got ID making equipment. We've covered that before. Prosecutor says that the DOJ has not accused him of having ties to foreign powers, but it must take things seriously, since at some point, Ali, when he was communicating with his, victims or other witnesses, claiming to have ties to the Pakistani intelligence to other people in the past. So as he's sort of, LARPing this action figure role playing this game, he is telling people Pakistani intelligence. Prosecutor again. So the judge says, oh, well, that's interesting. Any evidence about that? Perfect. Finally something. Any evidence? No. He says, we're investigating a statement that he made. That's it. That's all we got. So you don't have too much, do you? Now, defense attorney comes up. He takes the bat. He stands here. Smith, the attorney for Ali, says, Judge, our client's not even a Pakistani citizen, okay? The national ID card is something that's available to everyone people who are born there, parents who are from there. Things make it easier. It's not even complicated. Smith says that even the Pakistani embassy came out and felt the need to make it clear that Ali has no ties to Pakistani intelligence, which is exactly what you do when you disavow secret agents. We've learned this from Ethan Hunt in Mission Impossible many times. If you were caught or captured, you're going to be disavowed. Right? Don't call us. Right? You're gone. Here, Smith also says his client does not have a Pakistani passport. He cannot therefore flee. He has no passport. Where's he going to go? Smith, the defense lawyer, says Tazzy and his client, quote, are not partners. Stop calling him that. And when we talked about Ali's motion for in opposition to the detention hearing, we dialed in on that. We said that they were immediately pointing fingers at each other. Ali said, I don't know. I was duped I thought he was DHS. My goodness. I had no idea this was all a ruse. They are not on the same plane. And I don't think he's talking about an airplane. I think it's geometry there. We have another one from Sarah Lynch, says that Smith continues, says his client is not a Pakistan. Already got that one. He adds that there is no evidence that Ali actually gave any gift to the Secret Service agents. It's all just speculation. Says that the charge his client faces can lead to probation and no prison time. So it doesn't make any sense to detain him now. We have the presumption of innocence and the beyond a reasonable doubt standard, and they're kind of failing on all of these things. Says this is not a serious offense being charged here, Judge. He's not wrong about it, right? It's not like a national security criminal charge. It's just like impersonating a law enforcement officer. Happens all the time. And so he's, well, I don't know what they're so worked up about here, Judge. All right. Smith says the DOJ needs to meet the proper legal standards, and so far they haven't even come close. So they get Ali's father on the line, who we heard from in his prior video. Ali's father is prepared to speak to the judge, says, yeah, I'll take custody of him. It's my baby boy. He'll come on home and stay with Papa. Shaukat Raza, the father of Haider Ali, is now talking to the judge. Raza says he's willing to report any violations of the terms, Judge. As long as you're released to his custody, I'll make sure that we take good care of him. He wrote a letter into the court previously on April 10th, and we've covered this. He says that he's working with a limousine company, maintained the same job, does insurance, tax prepare, master's degree in economics, came to the U.S. 2001. He says, I am not aware of any connection to Pakistani intelligence. It is incorrect and beyond any credibility. I wholeheartedly believe he's not a danger to anyone. He says Haider was first inclined towards Sufism, then later converted to the Shia sect in Islam. Haider's travel to different countries is with the purpose of visiting shrines of Muslim and Sannits and scholars for spiritual evolution. Gave various gifts when he came back. In spite of a change in his belief system, he continued to remain close to his family. Father of 4, mom had knee surgery. We'll do whatever we can to make sure he is okay and abiding of the orders when he comes back home. Miss Lynch continues the reporting, and we change attorneys. We now swap over to Taherzadeh. Michelle Peterson's from the Public Defender's Office, and she now is addressing the judge. She comes up and she says, you know, Judge, the idea of turning on or off the GPS monitoring function on their phone is of no consequence. We talked about that with Ali. Forget about that. People do this all the time. All right, I do it, you know, if I don't want anybody to know where I am. You do it, Judge. We all do it. It's on or off. You don't want to be followed. Got it. Peterson, the defense lawyer, says no agent, by the way, should ever be talking to anyone else about their movements, who they're protecting, etc., to other fellow agents. She's making this point to counter the claims that the agents were compromised by the defendants, right? Saying that if these defendants were, you know, sort of monitoring them and they were monitoring each other and they were all like, hey, where are you at? Oh, well, I'm at the golf range. Oh, well, I'm at the local pub. I'm at the bar down here. I'm at John's. I'm at Tazzie's. I'm at Ali's. Right? Well, let's play poker. Right? You get it. He's whatever app or whatever, however this was functioning. I'm presuming that it's that. And I'm presuming that these people aren't like, yeah, where are you? I'm protecting the secrets of the first lady. I'm protecting Kamala. Here's where we're at. Here's where we're at. And here's where Biden's at. Like, I'm presuming that's not this. If it is, that's a whole different ball game, okay? But I'm presuming it's not quite that. I'm hopeful that it's not. But it, you know, could be. It's a whole separate conversation we're having. But here he's saying the defense lawyer representing Tazi is that that's on those agents. Okay, if they're sharing their locations on the golf club, on the golf course, that's on them, not on our clients. Harvey wants more details now about how the defendants were tipped off about this investigation. And we saw this come across from the prosecutor Rothstein. He said in a motion to the court that they had to move quickly because they were tipped off. Now, when I think of somebody being tipped off, I think somebody calls and provides a tip. Hey, I've got a tip for you. You're under investigation by the FBI for apparently being fake DHS agents. That would be a tip. When I heard that, the first thought that I had was that somebody was in the government who was literally tipping them off, who was, you know, making sort of like a mole in the government, communicating that to them, which would be a whole gigantic problem. But as we can see, might not have been that complicated. Might have been our own incompetent government's ineptitude that caused it. Here, Miss Lynch reports that the prosecutor told the court, the judge says, I want to know more. What's this tip-off about? 4 Secret Service agents, as we know, were placed on leave on Monday as this all got underway. When the Secret Service launched its probe into their own personnel, one of the investigators there reached out to Tazzy and said, we're conducting a review. Can you believe this? Secret Service calls him. Hey, you know, we're investigating these fake Department of Homeland Security agents, and you're number 1 on our list. This is the weirdest thing. I just got to ask, are you a fake Department of Homeland Security agent? Tazzy's like, who is this? We're the Secret Service. Ali's over there like, hang it up, get off the phone, hang it. Oh, and then they hang it up and then they just flush the phone down the toilet. In the whole thing, it's like, are you kidding me? Prosecutor is admitting this. This isn't like a bad sitcom. This is a prosecutor saying the Secret Service agents called Tazi and tipped him off, said he was conducting a review, told him, I'm reviewing this matter. So basically, according to Sarah, and she's listening to this in real time, says the Secret Service inadvertently tipped off the defendants during its own internal probe of its own agents. And as you can see here, she's a very objective reporter, journalist, somebody who's very highly qualified and credentialed. You see, this reporting has largely been done without any, opinions interjected into it, just listening and reporting the facts. Outstanding. Now here you can see we have 3 dots. I think there's a comment behind those 3 dots. What are they? That's, I don't know what you can insert into there, but I think you can see several different adjectives that you could use to describe her opinions on that. I won't presume to interject my own in there. I will just say, she says, the Secret Service inadvertently tipped the defendants off during its internal probe of its own agents. ... Yeah, I know what you mean, Sarah. I totally agree. I agree with that sentiment completely. She says the hearing has concluded. It's going to resume back at 4 p.m. That was only what took place in the morning. Judge is going to take all of that into his digestion, come back out after lunch with a decision. And so we're going to fast forward. Boom, we got it. Good afternoon now. Sarah Lynch brings us back, says we're resuming the hearing back for these 2 people impersonating the agents. Now, it's hard to hear, but it sounds like someone, maybe pretrial services, is saying the father for Ali cannot be determined to be a third-party custodian because he does not own the home, and his brother, who is in Saudi Arabia. So now we sort of have this custody problem, right? Part of the conversation here was that Ali was going to be returned to third-party custodian, going to be dad. Dad doesn't own the home. That's a problem. Brother owns the home. Brother's in Saudi Arabia. Going to call brother. Brother's going to sign off on this. Sounds like he's on a trip now. Sent a letter in support. So Ali's attorney thinks the brother would agree. The judge is now going to read his ruling aloud and not issue a formal order. The judge opting not to issue a written order, doesn't want any of this stuff in writing. You really can't blame him. So he's just going to go through and explain himself. He's going to say, this is my decision. This is why. And if you have any final sort of minor objections or anything you want to address, we'll deal with that at the end. Typically, we see sort of an order come out and then we can read through bit by bit the justification. The judge will put in the different citations and we can kind of really dissect it. Not going to do that here. He just read through it on the record. And so our best reporting comes from Miss Lynch. And here it is. She says, in all capitals, U.S. judge denies government request to detain 2 men accused of posing as federal agents. Big news. Of course, that came out, and I give that a nice heart and a retweet because, my goodness. Now, as this was moving forward, I was thinking that there was going to be something that the prosecutors were going to be able to pull out of their hat here, because all of the allegations, everything that we've read from their motions, from the criminal complaint itself, all of the supplementals say that this thing's pretty extensive. There are tentacles. We're up to 7 witnesses now, involve some of the most highest level Secret Service agents out there, talking literally about Kamala's residence, Jill Biden, and the White House, which is where Biden is. And now all of this is sort of secondary. They haven't met their burden. The judge is going to be releasing them on certain conditions. And so let's go through the judge's order. Judge says that the prosecutor's claim that Ali posed a flight risk was disavowed. Says the government is not given enough here to prove any ties to foreign powers or any foreign funds. Judge also notes the whole theory of this case is that these men cannot be trusted. So if you want to take that at the foundational level, he says you can't credit any of those prior claims that Ali was making. In other words, prosecutor, you're calling Ali kind of this liar, saying that he was this law enforcement agent, and he wasn't. But you want us to believe that those lies are now true? It doesn't make any sense. So the judge says, I can't buy it. It's not logically consistent. Continues, says Ali has no prior criminal record. We know he was charged with a domestic violence offense, but his wife and apparently him went into court, got that whole thing resolved. He has a wife and 4 kids. His whole life is here in the U.S. The judge says his wife just had surgery and he's immobile now. That's why mitigation is important in criminal cases. I say this all the time. A lot of defense attorneys ignore it. That stuff's important. It rings true. The judge referenced it. Hey, his wife's at home with a bad knee. Talks about it in his oral order. Harvey says the fact that no rent was ever paid for the apartments that was given to the Secret Service agent means that they lack funding. You know, they don't have like hundreds of thousands of dollars in additional assets that they can just repurpose for their escaping America. And we saw that in the video that we did yesterday, because there was a default judgment. Apparently $222,000 was owed to this apartment complex that was being used to house the Secret Service agents. They just didn't pay. But my question is, why didn't they get evicted? You know, what kind of apartment complex just allows people to live there rent-free, racking up $200,000 in bills? I don't know. Judge says, I am going to note the defendants here do not face much time, even if convicted, according to the federal sentencing guidelines, which means that they're probably not going to flee. It's not that consequential even for them. Harvey says the government finds no evidence that the FBI had any trouble locating, arresting, identifying Ali. As soon as he was in trouble, they just picked him up. He wasn't trying to run. It sounds like, even though he may have known something was coming down the pike. Judge also said, judge is now done talking. Well, he's not saying anything else. The judge is now done talking about the reason he's declining detention based on flight risk. And now we're switching gears and going over to this dangerousness question. And remember, when we're talking about whether or not to release somebody from federal custody, we're talking about several different variables. One, are they going to flee? Are they going to come back to court? Are they just going to hop on an airplane and get out of the country? And number two, if that's not a concern, let's say they're not going to flee, we also got to ask ourselves, is this person a threat? Are they a danger to the community? Are they going to hurt anybody out there? Because we may not want to release them for that reason either. Judge finishes the detention question, then talks about dangerousness, says, all right, well, here both men are charged with one single count of impersonating an officer. As the defense has noted, not serious. It's not a crime of violence. You can do that without being violent. You can impersonate a law enforcement officer without a gun, a weapon, without any threats at all. He notes that Tazi may have been a felon in possession of firearm, but to date, this is uncharged conduct, which is something that we've noted here. They spent a lot of time talking about these guns. They didn't charge him with anything. So a judge is going to say, well, that's okay. Well, charge him with a crime then for that. Harvey says that Supreme Court has issued a prior decision where the DOJ must show that Tazi knew that he was prohibited from possessing a firearm, that he knew, not that he should have known or that everybody else knew, but that he knew. Specifically, he had it in his mind, right? The sort of the mens rea, the mental state of culpability, all of these things is sort of a knowing violation of the law. And they say here, government hasn't met that burden, even if we're talking about the firearms, which again is uncharged conduct. Goes on, says the low guidelines range in this case, as of now, should be factored into the detention decision. Prosecutors didn't want them to think about that, but the judge said, I think about it when it's a high penalty, so why wouldn't I think about it when it's a low penalty? Even the statutory maximum is only 3 years, which on the grand scheme of things is not that significant relative to a life sentence. Harvey said it's a Class E felony. It's the least serious that we've got. The government has presented no evidence of attempted extortion or bribery. Haven't seen any of it. You're saying that all of this happened, but where's the evidence? Judge says, look, I'm troubled that the defendants had access to lists of all the residents in the apartment complex. All right, that's a problem. That could be a privacy violation, but even in those cases, pretrial detention is a rarity. The judge has seen all of this stuff before. I've seen other people come through here and have access to lists and things that they shouldn't have had access to. Yeah, it's a problem. We don't keep those people in custody indefinitely, especially if they're not a danger to anybody and you haven't proven they are. He says one of the most egregious acts to date was the fact that Tazi shot a man, but it was with an airsoft gun. So that's it. That's the most egregious thing. He was being recruited to join their so-called task force, but it was with an airsoft gun and not a firearm. So you're saying, so Mr. Prosecutor, you're saying that these men are dangerous criminals and monsters and national security threats because they shot somebody with an airsoft gun? Have you been on YouTube lately? You can see a lot of people shooting each other with airsoft guns. They're great videos. And so that's not that big of a deal, the judge says. We need a lot more of this. He says shooting someone with an airsoft gun is sophomoric behavior Well, that's your opinion, Judge, but not the type of serious behavior that necessitates detention, which I agree with him on that one. He understands real guns were also uncovered in this case. He does agree Tazzy's conduct is a little more serious than Ali's, but that is mitigated by the fact that Tazzy sought to have it properly registered, and there is no evidence he brandished it outside his home. As far as we can tell, according to the government's own evidence, there's not much here about Ali. Judge says there's no record that Ali possessed a gun outside of his apartment. There was even some conversation about whether he had it inside his apartment because of the prosecution was saying he didn't because he had kids and he kept it outside. The defense was saying, well, he's just a good guy. He doesn't have any illegal guns. Why would he? Harvey says, the judge, there is important questions here in this case. And I'm not questioning that. But to date, here's a quote. There has been no showing that national security information has been compromised. Oof. And so that's a tricky one. Because is the government going to come out and show you that the national security of this country has been compromised? I don't think so. And we haven't really seen too much conversation about this. They haven't really offered an in-camera review where they go and show the judge some of this stuff behind closed doors, which they could have, right? If they had more information, if they had some details about national security being severely jeopardized, they could have. And I haven't seen any motions filed or anything yet for, an ex parte presentation. It's not an ex parte, an in-camera review presentation of new evidence. In other words, that would be something that would not be public. It would not be discussed in some of these things. It would just be kind of going directly to the judge. Let's talk about this. Because it would be, under seal. It's a national security issue. They can't just sort of, communicate about these things openly. But my point is, I haven't seen any of those efforts communicated. You can't see what they're talking about, but you can see that they want to talk about something. And we haven't seen any of that. So the judge is confirming that. No showing that national security information has been compromised. So is this whole thing just a big misunderstanding? I don't think so. But let's go through. Harvey says there are important questions in this case. But to date, there's been no showing. He quotes Ali from his interview in which he claimed that, quote, they wanted to feel like they were on the same level with real agents, right? So they're LARPing, they're live action role playing. It's like those other guys on YouTube that are, they dress up in the knight's armor and stuff, and they go out there and rescue their fair maiden or something. I don't know what goes on at those events, but, it's something like that. Except this is just kind of going on around the White House, I guess. Harvey, the judge says, Mr. Prosecutor, quite frankly, there are worse crimes that have come before this one in this court. I've seen a lot worse things than this, and believe me, right? We all have. And it's not, it's kind of like this feels like it should be much more, but the evidence that the government is presenting, it just isn't there. There are significantly worse, he writes, and even more dangerous impersonation cases that have come before this court. Now, these guys happen to be involved with Secret Service agents protecting the White House, but they're just hanging out by the pool as far as we can tell. And the government hasn't made any additional showings. The 4 Secret Service agents are all, on leave now, and they're investigating this thing probably 24/7, all day, every day. But the evidence just isn't there. This moves forward, says there are significantly worse. Ali, accordingly, after the judge's ruling, says, here's what the conditions are. Ali's going to be allowed to stay with his father in his brother's home. Tazzy's going back to his folks. They will be on home detention with GPS monitoring. They cannot contact witnesses. They cannot go near embassies or the apartment the FBI raided. Must turn over all passports. They also must avoid airports. So it's, it sounds like kind of some standard stuff. Prosecutor asks for a stay, so the prosecutors are freaking out now. So they get released. No passports, no contact, no embassies or the apartment. Brothers, home detention, GPS ankle monitoring. Yeah, well, we'll see. We'll see. All right, so that's okay, Judge. So the judge issues those orders. Now, prosecutors are freaking out totally. ASUA prosecutor says, Judge, can we ask for a stay on that ruling, please? Heaven help us. For the judge's ruling, they say, we're going to appeal this. Prosecutor says, we're not going to request any additional considerations on this ruling, but we are going to decide tomorrow by 9 a.m. whether we're going to be appealing this order. And as I mentioned at the start of this video, they don't get to sort of introduce a bunch of new stuff. The deadline was the deadline. The evidence was provided by both sides. Arguments were made. The government got their shot at it. If they want to appeal it, they've got to find something that what went wrong, with this hearing. The judge was wrong because he didn't consider this, or another case shows that, or whatever it is. They don't get to come in and say, oh, we forgot. Here's an entire dossier of all the intelligence officials they've compromised. That's sort of a secondary thing that can happen through a separate mechanism. But here they're just talking about the appeal on the judge's ruling. Says, if you want it stayed any further, you got to talk to the chief judge. All right, Judge Howell. She's in charge. All right, I made my decision. Talk to her if you have any other issues. Fathers are now being asked to attest, swear in, saying they're going to abide by the terms here. They're going to serve as third-party custodians. Any violations must be reported to the court ASAP. And father, yep, no problem at all. Happy to do that, Judge. Thank you. Harvey is issuing the standard disclaimers. Don't tamper with evidence, violate any of these release terms. Otherwise, you're going right back into custody. Preliminary hearing is now scheduled for April 27th. Tomorrow, when the clock strikes 9, the government needs to show its hand. Are they going to appeal? Yes or no? Miss Lynch tells us the hearing is adjourned. And so please go follow Miss Lynch if you haven't already. Amazing follow. And it's a lot of fun to follow her along as she's reporting in real time. So I'd encourage you to do that. But we can see here from the court docket, we've got a couple additional details here. Release of the defendants is now stayed until 4:13 in the morning, 9 a.m. We'll see what the prosecution does. But, unless they, file a whole slew of new charges or find some other justification for keeping these guys, they're probably going to be out tomorrow morning. And they may appeal it just to appeal it. And remember, we're talking about the same Justice Department that is prosecuting all sorts of ridiculous nonsense, all sorts of stuff with the J6ers. We see they just lost over at the the Whitmer plot hoaxers. They're sort of in a little bit of a disarray is what it feels like, kind of around the country, focused on a lot of unnecessary prosecutions, in my opinion, and having some difficulty even winning some of these things, right? The Whitmer plot hoax was their own doing, and they couldn't even get convictions on that one. So, I'm not so sure what's going on here. We'll see if they're able to come up with something new, but the showing thus far has been pretty bad. And the fact that the Secret Service may have jeopardized their own investigation, it's just a gigantic facepalm. And I mean, it's really sad and embarrassing that this is sort of what you expect out of the intelligence agency are to sort of go and identify people who might be compromising other agents. These two seem like they might be the exact candidates for that type of role. And the Secret Service, everybody just was taken. Surprised or not? Maybe not surprised. I don't know. You'll have to let me know what you think about this down in the comments below. We'll continue to follow this. We'll slow down a little bit, as I'm sure you can understand, because of the sort of breaks now that we'll see as this case continues to evolve. But we will continue to cover it. What do you think? Is this much ado about nothing? Or is this all just a misunderstanding? I don't think so. Anyways, I would love it if you subscribed. I'd love it if you shared this video with somebody who you thought might think this is interesting or might be kind of shocked like we are, and invited them to come join the channel. Leave a comment. I look forward to seeing you on the next one.